France and the EU are bleeding without Africa's minerals. Here's the truth. Imagine you're in Paris, sipping your morning coffee, when the headlines explode: Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, Ghana, and a wave of other African nations have cut off all mineral exports to France, the EU, and their Western allies. No uranium. No gold. No bauxite. No manganese. No cobalt. The pipelines of raw power have been shut completely. This isn't science fiction, this is the reality we're seeing unfold today. And trust me, the impact on France and the European Union is nothing short of seismic. Today, we're going to break down what's really happening, why it's crippling the West, and how Africa's boldest moves in decades are rewriting the rules of global power. For decades, France and the EU have relied heavily on African nations for critical minerals. It wasn't just trade, it was dependency. Let's talk about some of the most critical links that have now been severed. Uranium from Niger. France's nuclear power plants produce over 70% of its electricity. For years, Niger supplied up to 40% of the uranium France imported. Now, that source is gone. The EU's entire nuclear sector feels the shockwaves. Gold from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Ghana. It's not just for jewelry. Gold is a global reserve currency, a hedge against inflation, and a component in electronics. With these sources closed, gold prices are spiking in Europe, putting pressure on both industries and investors. Bauxite from Guinea and Ghana, essential for aluminum production. Think aircraft, construction, packaging. Without steady access, European aluminum plants are running short, prices are rising, and supply chains are scrambling. Manganese from Gabon and Burkina Faso, needed for high-strength steel and battery tech. Losing these exports slows down Europe's EV ambitions. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's a full-scale resource crisis. France isn't just another EU country when it comes to African resources. It's historically been the biggest beneficiary of West Africa's minerals due to its colonial and post-colonial influence. That influence is evaporating. France's EDF nuclear giant is scrambling to secure alternative uranium suppliers. They're turning to Kazakhstan, Canada, and Australia, but these deals are expensive, politically sensitive, and logistically slow. Fuel prices are rising, not because France imports oil from West Africa in huge amounts, but because the loss of uranium forces more reliance on fossil fuels to balance the grid. The French defense industry is also hit. Platinum group metals and cobalt are essential for weapons systems, aerospace, and communication tech. Without them, military production slows. For a country already facing public protests over cost of living, this mineral cutoff is like pouring gasoline on a fire. The EU as a whole is feeling the strain. Germany's automotive sector, a global export powerhouse, depends on manganese, cobalt, and aluminum for both combustion and electric vehicles. Supply disruptions mean production slowdowns and job cuts. Southern Europe's construction industry is seeing price spikes in aluminum, steel, and copper, slowing housing projects and infrastructure builds. The EU's green energy goals, already ambitious, are now in jeopardy. Wind turbines, solar panels, and EV batteries all require minerals heavily sourced from the African nations that are cutting exports. The loss is not just economic, it's strategic. Without stable resource flows, the EU becomes vulnerable to resource-rich rivals like China, Russia, and even the Gulf states. So, how did this happen? It wasn't overnight. Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, and Ghana, along with others, have been pivoting away from Western economic dominance for years. They've forged new deals with Russia and China. They've nationalized key mining operations to keep more profits at home. They've banned or restricted raw mineral exports to force foreign companies to build refineries locally. For countries like Mali and Burkina Faso, it's also political payback. Decades of French military and economic presence ended with anger, accusations of neocolonialism, and mass protests. Now, they're using their mineral wealth as a geopolitical weapon. Let's zoom in on the nuclear issue. France's energy mix is unique. It's the most nuclear-dependent country in the world. Losing Niger's uranium hit them harder than anyone else in Europe. Short-term fixes involve tapping uranium stockpiles, buying from other suppliers, and signing emergency contracts. The problem? Those contracts are more expensive, raising energy costs for households and businesses. Worst-case scenario, rolling blackouts during peak demand seasons if replacements can't be secured in time. This creates a dangerous loop. Higher energy prices fuel inflation, inflation fuels protests, protests fuel political instability. The EU's plan to go carbon neutral by 2050 relies on massive quantities of African minerals, cobalt, manganese, lithium, bauxite, and rare earth elements. Without them, EV targets collapse. Fewer batteries equals fewer electric cars on the road. Wind and solar projects stall. Turbine magnets and solar cells need rare earths and specialty metals. Battery storage tech slows down, meaning renewable energy adoption slows. China, meanwhile, has preferential deals with many of these same African nations. They're not just getting the minerals, they're getting them cheaper, and in greater volume, leaving Europe in the dust. Here's what's happening on the ground. Inflation. The mineral shortage is pushing up production costs across the board, from electronics to cars to construction. Those costs are hitting consumers hard. Job losses. Auto factories in Germany, aerospace plants in France, and electronics manufacturers across the EU are cutting jobs as raw materials run short. Trade deficit growth. The EU is paying more for fewer resources from alternative suppliers, widening its trade imbalance. This isn't just an economic headache, it's a structural vulnerability that can't be fixed in months. It could take years to rebuild stable supply chains. 8. Africa's gains, a new power dynamic. While the EU struggles, Africa's resource-rich nations are gaining. Higher revenues from selling to Asia at premium prices. More political leverage in global forums like the African Union and BRICS+. Infrastructure growth as China and Russia pour investment into ports, roads, and refineries. For the first time in modern history, African states are holding real negotiating power over Europe, not the other way around. 9. The West's desperate moves. France and the EU aren't just watching from the sidelines, they're scrambling. Sending diplomatic missions to repair ties with African governments they alienated. Offering better trade terms and development aid in exchange for renewed mineral access. Exploring mining expansion in Greenland, Canada, and Australia, but these projects take a decade or more to develop. Some analysts warn that covert political interference in Africa, the kind we saw during the Cold War, could make a comeback. As Western powers look to undermine governments blocking their access. The road ahead, what this means for global power. If Europe fails to restore access to African minerals in the next 5 to 10 years, here's what's likely. Permanent loss of industrial competitiveness in key sectors like EVs, aerospace, and defense. Greater dependence on China for processed minerals, effectively outsourcing the green transition to Beijing. Shift in global leadership toward a more multipolar world, with Africa, Asia, and the Middle East setting the terms of trade. France, once the dominant force in West Africa, could become just another player negotiating from a position of weakness rather than control. For decades, Europe thought Africa needed them. Now, it's clear, it's Europe that needs Africa. And Africa has decided the rules have changed. If this video opened your eyes, hit the like button, share it with someone who still thinks Africa is just a developing region. And subscribe for more deep dives into the shifting balance of global power. Because trust me, this is only the beginning.